The crisp, sterile air of the Galactic Council's Judgment Hall contrasted with the heated words exchanged among its members. Representatives of dozens of advanced species debated humanity's continued inclusion in the Alliance, their frustrations bubbling over centuries of misunderstanding and human defiance. To them, humans were unpredictable, rash, and stubborn, a species that rarely adhered to galactic norms. Standing at the center of this storm of arguments was Commander Elena Vega, representing Earth with the poise of someone used to being underestimated. Her dark eyes scanned the room, settling briefly on the towering Zalzar envoy who had been particularly vocal in his disdain. "They are a species of chaos," he roared, his translucent wings flaring dramatically. "They refuse to adopt our harmonious ways. They reject logic, order, and peace." Elena tilted her head, suppressing a smirk. Humans had a knack for riling up even the most stoic species, and today was no exception. Her fingers lightly drummed on the table before her. She had to choose her words carefully. Before she could respond, the debate took another turn. "Enough talk of removal," said Zuayantak, a member of the insected Crevian race. "The question is, why do humans consistently act against the Council's better judgment?" His compound eyes fixed on Elena, his voice clicking with disdain. "Do they not understand their place?" A subtle ripple of tension swept through the chamber. Elena stood, her voice calm but commanding. "We've never claimed to be perfect. But before you decide our fate, ask yourselves this: why are we still here? Despite everything, why hasn't humanity crumbled in the face of challenges that have obliterated countless species in the past?" The room quieted. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough to redirect the conversation. It was a strategy Elena had mastered: pose a question to unnerve her critics and buy time. But even she knew that the scrutiny was only beginning. Outside the hall, an unexpected transmission crackled through her communicator. The deep, guttural voice belonged to Kyle Dorn, a hulking Vrexian warrior who had once been an enemy of Earth. Their alliance was uneasy, built on mutual survival rather than trust. "Commander," Kyle rumbled, "there's been an incident on Vera 7. A mining colony has gone silent. Preliminary reports indicate human involvement." Elena stiffened. Humans being accused of causing chaos was almost routine at this point. But the timing was suspect. If this turned into a full-blown scandal, it would solidify humanity's precarious position in the Alliance. Kyle hesitated before adding, "You might want to see this for yourself. It's unusual." Elena sighed and turned to her aide, a bright-eyed engineer named Kieran. "Prep the ship. We're heading to Vera 7. Kieran blinked. "Now? What about the Council?" Elena grabbed her jacket, her expression unyielding. "The Council's debate can wait. If there's one thing humanity excels at, it's facing the unknown head-on." Hours later, the Terran vessel Resolute hovered over the desolate expanse of Vera 7. The colony's facilities were intact, but there were no signs of life. The silence was unnerving. Kieran studied the initial scans, his face pale. "This doesn't make sense. Energy levels are normal, environmental conditions are stable, but there's no one here." Elena's jaw tightened. "Send out a message. If anyone's alive down there, they'll respond." Kyle, standing behind them with his massive arms crossed, snorted. "If they're alive, Commander, they might wish they weren't. Look." He pointed to a monitor showing the feed from a recon drone. Scattered across the facility were strange markings etched into the metal walls. They were unlike anything Elena had ever seen, sharp, jagged symbols that seemed to pulse faintly. "What are those?" Kieran whispered, his voice barely audible. Elena's instincts screamed danger. "Something tells me this isn't just about humans causing trouble. Let's gear up. We're going down there." As the team prepared to descend, Elena's thoughts churned. She didn't know what awaited them on the surface, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just a human problem anymore. It was something much bigger. Something the entire galaxy might regret ignoring. The air on Vera 7 felt heavy, laden with an unnatural stillness that made every sound seem amplified. The Resolute's crew disembarked cautiously, their boots crunching against the gritty, metallic soil. Commander Elena Vega led the way, her hand never straying far from her holstered weapon. Behind her, Kieran adjusted a scanning device, its hum breaking the oppressive silence, while Kyle Dorn's hulking presence loomed like a living shield. "What kind of colony just vanishes?" Kieran muttered, his voice jittery. His eyes darted nervously toward the strange markings on the walls, now glowing faintly as if reacting to their presence. "It's not the first time," Kyle grunted, his clawed hand gripping a battle-axe-sized plasma blade. "But it's usually not this quiet. Or this deliberate." The team advanced toward the central control hub, their movements cautious yet deliberate. The faint glow of the colony's emergency lighting flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. Elena signaled for the team to halt as her communicator crackled. "Anything on the scanners, Kieran?" Elena asked, keeping her voice low. Kieran frowned, his eyes fixed on his handheld device. "The life sign scans are erratic. It's like the readings are there but shifting, as if something's actively trying to obscure them." Kyle stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. "Or someone." Elena's thoughts raced. The markings on the walls pulsed faintly in rhythm with the readings. It was almost as if they were alive, or aware. The idea sent a chill down her spine. "Let's find that control hub. If there are any answers, they'll be there," Elena commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. As they approached the colony's heart, the team stumbled across their first grim discovery. A heap of discarded tools and clothing lay scattered in the corridor, as if their owners had vanished mid-task. The eerie absence of any biological remnants only deepened the mystery. No blood, no bodies, just a void where people had once been. "This isn't natural," Kieran whispered, his fingers trembling as he scanned the scene. "Commander, whatever caused this, it wasn't just some accident." Elena nodded grimly. "Stay sharp. This is starting to feel like a trap." They entered the control hub, its vast array of consoles and holographic displays surprisingly functional despite the colony's eerie abandonment. Elena gestured to Kieran to access the logs, while she and Kyle kept watch. "It's encrypted," Kieran muttered, his fingers flying over the console. "But there's something here. A transmission log, maybe?" As Kieran worked, the strange symbols appeared on the console screens, their jagged forms twisting unnaturally. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and an otherworldly sound filled the room, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. "What in the void is that?" Kyle growled, his weapon raised defensively. Before anyone could answer, the symbols on the screen began to coalesce, forming a cohesive image. A figure appeared, a tall, sinewy humanoid with an elongated skull and eyes like glowing embers. Its expression was unreadable, but the malice in its gaze was unmistakable. "You should not have come," the figure hissed, its voice reverberating as if spoken through layers of reality. "This place is no longer yours." Elena stepped forward, her voice firm. "Who are you? What happened to the colonists?" The figure tilted its head, a faint smile curling its lipless mouth. "They have been repurposed. Their essence now serves a higher cause." Kyle's grip on his weapon tightened. "Repurposed? Sounds like something that needs smashing." The figure's expression darkened. "You do not understand. You cannot understand. Leave now, before you share their fate." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving an uneasy silence in its wake. Kieran stared at the console, his face pale. "That wasn't pre-recorded. That thing was watching us." Elena clenched her fists, her mind racing. "Whatever it is, it's tied to those symbols. And it doesn't want us here." Kyle's voice rumbled like thunder. "Then we should give it something to fear." Before they could strategize, the sound of movement echoed through the corridors, soft at first, but growing louder. The team froze, weapons ready. From the shadows emerged figures cloaked in darkness, their forms distorted as if partially out of phase with reality. Their eyes glowed with the same faint light as the symbols on the walls. "They're not alive," Kieran gasped, scanning them. "Or at least, not anymore." The figures moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance in an instant. The first wave lunged, but Kyle met them head-on, his plasma blade cutting through the air with a blinding arc of energy. Elena fired her weapon with precision, each shot landing true, but the creatures seemed to absorb the impact, slowing only momentarily before pressing forward. "We're not equipped for this!" Kieran shouted, dodging a clawed swipe. Elena's voice rang out above the chaos. "Fall back! We need to regroup!" The team retreated through the narrow corridors, the creatures in relentless pursuit. Kyle's booming laughter echoed as he fought, relishing the challenge despite the odds. Kieran stumbled, nearly overtaken, but Elena hauled him to his feet, firing over her shoulder. "Keep moving!" she barked. They reached the landing zone, breathless and battered. The Resolute's automated defenses sprang to life, firing concentrated energy blasts that finally slowed the creature's advance. For the first time, the team had a moment to catch their breath. "What were those things?" Kieran panted, his face ashen. Elena looked back toward the colony, her expression hard. "Whatever they weren't just accidents of nature. Someone, or something, is behind this. And they've made their move." Kyle grinned, his fang teeth glinting. "Good. I was starting to get bored." Elena's lips curved into a grim smile. "Let's see how they handle a species that doesn't know how to quit." The tension lingered as the team regrouped, the reality of their situation sinking in. This was no ordinary mission. They had stumbled into the heart of a threat that could ripple across the galaxy, and humanity's resilience was about to be tested like never before. The next confrontation came sooner than expected. The creatures they had encountered were relentless, their strange, distorted forms appearing as if out of the fabric of reality itself. After barely escaping their grasp in the control hub, Elena and her team barely had time to catch their breath. The scanners were still detecting movement, more of those shadowy beings closing in. "Too many," Kieran muttered, his hands trembling as he tapped frantically on his console. "They're surrounding us. We don't know where they're coming from." Elena tightened her grip on her weapon, scanning the darkened corridors with vigilant eyes. "We can't outrun them. If they've tracked us this far, they'll keep coming." Kyle, ever the warrior, adjusted his plasma blade, its humming glow flickering in the dim light. "Then we fight. What choice do we have?" Kieran looked between Elena and Kyle, his voice tense. "But how do we fight something that doesn't die? They didn't bleed, they didn't flinch. They just kept coming." Elena moved forward, her expression hardened. "We fight smart. They're not just creatures. They're linked to whatever is controlling this place." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, a deep, reverberating rumble that shook their bones. The source wasn't seismic, it was something far more unsettling. From the shadows, the creatures emerged, more numerous than before. Their glowing eyes pierced through the darkness, their movements fluid and unnatural. Elena raised her weapon, scanning for the weakest points in their formation. "We hold them here. Buy some time, Kieran." Kieran nodded, his fingers flying across the controls. "I've got an idea, but it's risky. If this works, we might be able to sever their link to whatever's controlling them." Kyle grunted as he charged forward, plasma blades slashing through the air with precision. The creatures converged on him, their distorted forms howling as they lunged. Kyle was a blur of motion, his strength overwhelming, but there were too many of them. Elena moved closer to Kieran, her weapon firing in rapid succession. "Whatever it takes, Kieran. Now!" Kieran pulled a device from his pack, a shimmering orb that crackled with energy. "This will disrupt their connection, if I can calibrate it properly." But before he could activate it, one of the creatures lunged at Kieran, claws swiping through the air. In a swift motion, Kyle intercepted the attack, his blade cleaving through the creature with devastating force. The monster dissolved into glowing particles, vanishing as if it had never existed. "Not now, Kieran!" Kyle bellowed, pushing Kieran to the ground. Kieran scrambled back to his feet, the orb still clenched in his hand. "I'm almost there." Elena fired continuously, covering Kieran's retreat as he worked to stabilize the device. "Stay focused, Kieran! We're running out of time. The creatures pressed harder, their numbers relentless. One after another, they seemed to materialize from the shadows, their glowing eyes never wavering. Kyle was now surrounded, fighting tooth and claw, his weapon a blur of energy, but the strain was evident. Elena could see the fatigue setting in, the weight of the battle beginning to take its toll. "Kieran, now!" Elena shouted, her voice cracking with urgency. Kieran activated the orb. A blinding burst of light exploded from its surface, disrupting the creature's forms. The glow pulsated, creating ripples in the air, and the creatures faltered. Their movements slowed, their glowing eyes dimming. Elena seized the moment, taking out several of the weakened creatures before they had a chance to regroup. Kyle, now panting heavily, stumbled back, his weapon lowering. The oppressive weight of the battle began to lift, but the threat was far from over. "We've bought ourselves some time," Kieran said, his voice trembling but victorious. "But it won't last." Elena took a deep breath, scanning the horizon. The creatures were retreating, their distorted forms fading into the shadows once more. "We need to get to the surface, now." Kyle nodded, his grip still tight on his weapon. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." As they emerged from the depths of the colony, the full scale of their predicament came into view. The sky above Vera 7 shimmered unnaturally, waves of energy flickering as if the planet itself was alive. The creatures had been merely the harbingers of something far greater, something far beyond their understanding. Elena's mind raced as she stared at the horizon. They had survived the creatures, but the true danger had yet to reveal itself. Whatever force was behind this, it wasn't done with them, not by a long shot. Kyle placed a hand on her shoulder. "They'll be back. And when they do, we'll be ready." Elena's eyes narrowed. "We better be." Elena stood at the edge of the colony, staring out at the horizon as the sun began to rise over the alien world. The remnants of the battle still echoed in her mind. Kyle, bloodied but standing, Kieran, his hands trembling from the device that had disrupted the creatures. They had survived, but the victory felt hollow. The creatures might have been driven back for now, but something far worse was lurking beneath the surface of Vera 7. Kyle approached her, his expression grim but steady. "We've fought them before," he said, his voice low. "We'll fight them again." Elena tightened her grip on her weapon, her thoughts racing. "We won't survive another confrontation like that. The creatures' resilience, their numbers, there's no way we can keep relying on brute force." Kieran approached from behind, his gaze distant but focused. His fingers brushed through his hair, still adjusting to the weight of what they'd just faced. "We need answers. We need to understand what's driving them. If we keep fighting blindly, we'll only survive so long." Elena nodded, her eyes narrowing. "We've seen what they're capable of, but what we've yet to uncover is why. Why did they target us? Why did they ignore entire galaxies and focus on Earth?" Kieran took a deep breath. "What if this isn't just about survival? What if this is something deeper, something they were drawn to? Something we have that no other species do?" Kyle, ever pragmatic, folded his arms and glanced at the distant horizon. "Humans, we've always stood apart. Different in ways they couldn't fathom. Maybe that's why they came here. But if they believe we're weaker, we've shown them otherwise. Maybe that's the key." Elena's mind wandered back to their encounter in the depths of the colony. The creatures didn't just emerge from the darkness. They were already here, waiting, prepared. But what had tipped the balance in humanity's favor wasn't strength, or sheer numbers. It was something else entirely. "What if they feared us all along?" Elena asked, half to herself. "What if what sets us apart isn't what they've seen, but what they've never seen?" Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "Something beneath the surface, something buried deep. Something they overlooked. We've always looked above, at the stars, at the vastness of space, but maybe there's something more fundamental. Something they never considered." Kyle, his brow furrowed, stepped closer. "It's not about us being stronger. It's about what we're connected to. If they feared us, maybe they feared what made us. Whatever lies beneath this planet, whatever caused them to hesitate, it's what we need to find." The trio knew their answers lay in the depths, beneath the surface. The creatures had been the first wave, the initial encounter. But they weren't the end. They were just the beginning. What waited below could reshape everything they understood about their universe. As they set out again, leaving the surface colony behind, the tension was heavier than ever before. The surface may have been eerily quiet, but beneath the ground, they could feel the whispers of something ancient, something waiting. Elena glanced back one last time, her eyes scanning the horizon. They may have ignored us once, but now they've awoken something they can't control. Kyle tightened his grip on his weapon. And if we don't find the answers soon, there might be no one left to stop them. The journey into the unknown had only just begun.